the father of the deceased Indian student has requested the Indian government to get the mortal remains of his son back to India as soon as possible. He's also urged the government to look into high donations taken by medical colleges in India so students are not compelled to go to foreign countries. Listen in.
Inform to our senior officials, embassy, Prime Minister to bring back my son's dead body.
Okay.
And also I request to all these political leaders kindly look into the matter and see that donation it is very bad, and all these intelligent students, they are going to study in abroad. They think that education here, if they plan to get that education here, they have to pay crores to get that seat. And the same education, better than this, they are getting very good education in abroad, and all this practical equipment also very standard.
So that is the latest update that we have at this point in time. We'll be going across to my colleagues as well who've been tracking this development very, very closely from Karnataka and from Ukraine and the neighboring countries as well to tell you how the situation is at the moment. In fact, it was a very sad day for India because we got report of first Indian casualty. 20-year-old Naveen, in fact, lost his life because he was standing in a queue outside the grocery store, and then he lost his life while shelling was happening, and he had just gone out of the bunker where he was with other friends to get some food and some essentials for all of them, and he could not really come back. Now the family is urging the government to ensure that mortal remains are brought back to India as soon as possible. We just heard the father of deceased Indian student who has now requested the Indian government to get the mortal remains of his son back to India as soon as possible. Neha Hebale is now joining us live at this point in time. Neha, good evening. Have you spoken to the family members? When was the last time they spoke to Naveen? What have they told you? How many more people are there where Naveen was? Neha, can you hear me? And there's massive outrage among Indian students who are stranded in Ukraine while India has stepped up its evacuation process. 1,400 Indians were brought back home today alone, but more than 10,000 are still in Ukraine. Students are scared for their life, living in bunkers without food and water, frustrated at not being able to get out of that war-torn country. They are blaming the Indian government now for not helping them out. Jonathan is now joining us live this evening to help us understand how the situation is in Ukraine. Jonathan, good evening. Thank you for joining us live from Ukraine this evening. Tell us exactly where you are and what is the situation around you.
Yes, I'm in the western city of Lvov, as I believe it's pronounced, which is the de facto refugee muster point, if you like. I'm currently at the main railway station. You may be able to see around me literally hundreds upon hundreds of people milling around. Most of them are refugees from further east. Trains coming in all day from Kiev and the like. Some of these people will stay here. Many more of them intend to proceed further west to Poland, to Hungary and countries of safety. But that's where I am at the moment. As we were hearing earlier, though, the city of Kharkiv has been under absolutely intense shelling and bombardment all day. The main opera house was blown up in what seems to be an act of extreme cruelty and psychological terror. So the war is advancing. It's advancing westwards. It hasn't reached here yet, but it's probably only a matter of time.
You're telling us you're in the western part of the country, which is being considered as slightly safer as compared to the eastern side. Have you managed to speak to Indian students specifically who've managed to come here? What are the kind of difficulties they are facing? Because Indian government has told them to reach to the safer areas from where evacuation could happen. But is it so easy to reach here? Jonathan? Jonathan, if you're able to hear me, I'm trying to understand from you the challenges people are facing, the Indian students are facing, because Indian government has now asked them to reach towards the western part of the country, which is slightly safer as compared to the eastern side, and also better than how the situation is in the capital city. So how are students really managing to reach here? What are the problems that they are facing right now?
Well, I was in Romania. I mean, time flies. I was in Romania 2 or 3 days ago, and I met a huge contingent of Indian students who had successfully evacuated over the Romanian border. Now, they were from a university town called Chernovitz, and in a sense, they were in luck because A, they were quite near the border, and B, the Russian advance had not yet reached them by the time they left. So for them, it was a relatively simple, I mean, a grueling journey by all accounts, but a relatively simple matter of getting a bus over the border. Now, those students in Kharkiv and Kiev face a completely different prospect. Not only are these cities encircled by Russian military, Russian armor, tanks, artillery pieces, Grad rocket launchers, which are absolutely terrifying pieces of military hardware. But also, you know, there's absolutely no guarantee that the roads are safe. I certainly would hesitate before taking a road in central Ukraine as we speak. Now, I suppose the only option that may be available to them is a train. But as you were seeing just behind me a moment ago, these trains are massively oversubscribed, and it's scenes of utter complete chaos here at the railway station. I imagine precisely the same in Kiev.
Will it be possible, Jonathan, for you to show us around a little bit how the situation is?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. How the situation is here? Well, as I say, you can see with your own eyes. It's just
if you could
relatively.
Just show us around as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sent you some footage earlier, which you may or may not be able to run as underlay while I'm talking. But yes, I mean, come with me for a little stroll. There are stands that have been, and this is really a tribute to the humanity of the Ukrainian people. There are stands that have been set up everywhere around here, handing out free food, free drinks, free cups of tea. There was a guy chopping wood in order to fuel one of those burners, you know, you see in kind of old World War II movies, where people sit around warming their hands. Now, a terrifying thought, but of course, a lot of the people who arrived here won't have anywhere to stay. I mean, you know, as a journalist, as a well-funded, well-resourced journalist, had a heck of a time finding a room in Lviv because it's so oversubscribed. Many, many hundreds of these people may even have nowhere to sleep tonight, which is a horrible prospect because it's below zero now already, and then overnight it's going to be hellishly cold. So here we are. Here's one of those kind of soup kitchens. They are almost. You know, they're handing out free food, free drinks here. Lots of volunteers. The other interesting thing is that I've seen people standing around holding up signs. And I asked, what does this sign mean? And they said, well, look, basically, I'm offering my house as accommodation for free. So if you were to arrive here with your young family and saw one of these signs, then this this humanitarian, this guardian angel would say, well, then come and sleep in my spare room, come and sleep on my sofa. So people are really coming together. There's an incredible sense of humanitarianism and community here in the face of this horrific conflict.
Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us live from Ukraine this evening, showing us around and telling us how the situation is at the moment. And it was really nice to see how people are coming out in large numbers as volunteers to help each other. The temperature is quite low there. People are offering food to anyone who needs in this time of distress. Jonathan, appreciate you joining us this evening. Let me now go across to my colleague Pradeep Datta as well. Pradeep, good evening. You've managed to reach Poland. Can you tell us how the situation is right now? Where exactly are you?
See, Heena, right now I'm in Poland. I'll be heading toward the Ukrainian border that's considered to be the dangerous frontiers of the world right now. And why I will be heading toward that region? Because that is the place where thousands of Indian students are stranded. And that's one of the reasons that Prime Minister Narendra Modi, 24 hours back, he had a meeting. And that was the time when he signed a job to 4 of his union ministers to go to different countries so that they can facilitate safe passage and safe movement of the students who are stuck up. But so far as today is concerned, today was an unfortunate day. One of the Indian students lost life, as is true about every war, and truth is the first casualty. And here in this case also, conflicting reports are coming. Some people are saying that he was shot. That's what his friend was saying while talking to one of my colleagues on phone. And the others are saying that it was because of the shrapnel that was fired, because of the shelling from the Russian forces. So whatever the reality is, that one precious life has been lost and many others are stranded. And that's one of the reasons that General VK Singh, Union Minister, right now he is here in Warsaw. He interacted with the students. He'll be going towards that border belt, trying to ensure that easily these students can be brought over to safer places. Already, the 2 ambassadors of both Ukraine as well as Russia had been summoned by the authorities there in India. They were asked to provide safer passage. That was the reason that 3 days back, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had a telephonic conversation, 26-minute telephonic conversation with Vladimir Putin. He also insisted upon that amicably the issue need to be sorted out, because India believes in peaceful diplomacy. And the second thing was that he was talking about evacuation of the students and safety of the Indian students, because Prime Minister has made it a point that at any cost they have to ensure that each and every Indian soul stuck up in Ukraine is brought back to safer places. So efforts are on. There's a real big challenge. But the people who are poaching up there in the border belt, they're facing many problems. It's very cold here. Right now it's 1 degree centigrade. By evening it will be -4. You can very well understand the more will be moving towards Ukraine, the temperature will be decreasing, because once the sun is going to descend, the temperature is going to further decrease. That means nights it is -6 to -8 degrees centigrade. And if you have to spend those nights, sleepless nights, out in open under freezing cold, you can very well understand the kind of the problems the students must be facing. That's one of the reasons that India is making many efforts to get them back. But if you look at the overall conflict and the war, because right now there are several allegations and charges leveled against a Russian army. They said that Russian army had used a vacuum bomb, and this vacuum bomb is a banned armament. This snuffs out oxygen, snuffs out life. So this can't be used. This is total violation of the Geneva Convention. The second is that we have seen that Russian troops, when on 24th of February, they started moving towards Russia. Their tanks started rolling on the street. They thought that it will be a cakewalk, but nothing of that sort has happened even after 6 days. They had not been able to fully occupy Kyiv, capital of Ukraine. And now they have asked all the civilians to leave Kyiv, because they had been claiming that they are targeting only military installation. But if you look at the pictures on the ground, that narrates a different kind of a story.
Right.
Many of those civilian structures have been damaged. So that's one of the reasons there's a lot of panic. Some people are like sitting ducks inside their homes, or some are trying to take shelter in the basement or those bunkers where they can hide to prevent themselves from the shells being fired by the Russian troops. So situation overall is tense. But yes, the people are asking not to panic, because this is the time they have to be united, and the government is making its efforts to get them back as soon as they can. And we will be getting you all the updates from the dangerous frontier of the world, where from people are fleeing. But we have an unwritten commitment that we'll be going to that area, bringing you all those reports to the viewers, because that is our commitment with the viewers and people of the country.
All right, Pradeep Datta, appreciate you joining us live this evening. We'll, of course, be coming back to you for more on this developing story. Meanwhile, let's also focus on the issue of evacuation. Let's discuss the challenges that these students are facing and what can be done to ensure that the evacuation process is quite smooth. Before that, let me quickly go across to my colleague Neha Hebale as well, who is joining us live this evening. Neha, good evening. I was trying to understand from you earlier, have you spoken to the father of Naveen, who unfortunately lost his life today in Ukraine to shelling? How many more people were there with him in the bunker? When was the last time he had a conversation with the family, and what did he say?
Well, Heena, most tragic news coming to light over here. In fact, the family of Naveen, Nyamagowda Shekharappa over here, who lost his life, is distraught to say the least. We heard a little while from the father just a little while ago, where he went on to say that all he wants at this point in time is that his son's mortal remains be sent to the family. And most importantly, also, he did go on to stress on a very important, mention of why so many students or so many children get lured, so many intelligent children get lured to actually go abroad and study in countries like Ukraine. He also went on to, in fact, make a plea to both the Prime Minister's office as well as the government and other officials to help ensure that Naveen's mortal remains are brought back. Now, coming to what happened, Heena, we've been speaking to many of Naveen's friends, his flatmates also, the last ones who actually spoke to him while he was still alive. We understand that it was in the morning that he actually went out to get some groceries for all four of, his flatmates, in fact, including him, who stayed in one bunker. And when he actually stepped out to get the groceries, is when his friends were still in contact with him. About 2 hours later, 2 hours passed by when his phone wasn't really, of course, being answered by him, is when they frantically called him. And later, what we actually understand from the account of the students and the flatmates over here is that and there was, in fact, the phone was answered by an unknown person, and unfortunate information or the tragic news was passed on to them. So it's really quite unfortunate. The students over there still terrified, especially his flatmates who, still go on to say that the situation on ground is still quite grim, that they're all still in the bunkers, and they're hoping that assistance reaches them at the earliest.
All right, Neha, appreciate you joining us with all of those details. We'll keep coming back to you for more on this story. Let's now go across to our guest joining us on the broadcast this evening on Urban Debate. We have Dr VB Soni, former Indian ambassador to Ukraine, KP Fabian, who is former diplomat who evacuated Indians from Kuwait. We also have with us Meera Shankar, former ambassador, live this evening. Dr VB Soni, I want to begin the discussion with you because you understand Ukraine quite well. An Indian student, unfortunately, has lost his life today, the first Indian casualty in this particular war between Russia and Ukraine. What are the kind of challenges that are there as far as evacuation of these stranded Indian students are concerned that Indian government must now keep in mind so that nobody else loses life?
Well, what I found quite amazing is that there was no action plan anticipated. To my mind, civil defense people ought to have been brought in. Kind of a team should have been organized locally, because it doesn't have to be only the embassy. Embassy could be the point where they could organize things. Local Indians who are based there doing business and other things, they should have been involved. And not only in Kiev, but in all the regions where there is a large concentration of Indian students, they should have also made arrangement for being one or two persons being spokesperson. The embassy can't possibly go to 500, 600, 800, or whatever the number of people is there. But if there is a locally appointed person in charge, he could then interact on the ground, because you can't all the time, they can't possibly be ringing you up all the time to the embassy. And embassy, there are only 6, 7 people who it's a smaller size mission in Ukraine. So they can't possibly handle so many calls coming in, and that causes frustration. To my mind, that should have been done, which means contingency plan, how to handle the situation, civil defense issues must have been practiced. You should have had, I'm sure that there would be a list of the students and where they are, because they are expected to register themselves. and they give their contact details. I believe whenever the advisories were given, I think the students were actually reading them and trying to follow them. But just sending advisory is nothing, because they need guidance. They are young students, 18, 19, 20 or whatever, and they also do not know how to handle the bureaucracy. Ukrainian bureaucracy can be quite tough to get things done. Formalities to be completed are quite detailed, and so it's something which a person who actually lives there handles. So the best avenue would have been for the Indian business community to come forward, because they also have regional offices, local regional offices. So that is the point. I don't see any indication emerging that there was no plan in action. Even now, civil defense forces, or at least their experience, ought to have been utilized. To my mind, that was one thing which was missing.
Interesting points you're making, sir, and we'll discuss further about the things that the government can do, because now also there are over 15,000 students, Indians, who are still stranded there. Ambassador Meera Shankar, the father of the boy who lost his life in shelling, has claimed that Indian embassy did not reach out to students who are stranded in Kharkiv. How does it really work out? Because, the government is saying that they issued advisories even before the conflict started. Not many came forward, as Dr. Soni was telling us that, just advisories are not enough. They need guidance as well, which probably wasn't there. What do you make of India's evacuation plan? Did we delay it? Are we doing enough now?
Well, I think it's a very difficult situation right now, and it's not going to be easy to organize evacuation in a situation where the conflict is intensifying. But I agree with my colleague, Dr. VB Soni, that certainly contingency plans should have been drawn up, including for reinforcement of the embassy in time, anticipating that if there is a crisis, then the embassy needs to be shored up. You open an emergency center, or if you can't open an emergency center there, you could provide a link with a call center in India, which is operational 24 hours and also linked back to the embassy. I mean, there are really logistical steps which you have to take, which I think were perhaps not taken. But right now, I think it's a very, very difficult situation. And the embassy has issued an advisory for all students to make their way to the nearest border point, especially in the West. And then, because they think that Kiev will not be safe, since Russian troops are heading towards Kiev and the fighting is likely to intensify. So the problem is that transport is difficult. Buses, taxis, etc., may not be easily available. Petrol is very scarce. Trains are running, but there are huge crowds trying to get onto the train, so there can be delay. And then at the border itself, there's a queue of refugees, including Ukrainians, who want to get out. And so people are having to wait at the border for several hours in queues before crossings can take place, with temperatures going below zero. So there are two suggestions that perhaps might be helpful in the situation, because even when they cross the border, quite often they have to wait for hours and hours in the open. Is it possible to make some kind of makeshift arrangements for food and accommodation for the students once they cross the border into the neighboring countries, whether it's Poland, Romania, or then or Hungary? And the other is, can we involve the Red Cross? Because in such situations, the International Red Cross in crisis situations basically can be in touch with both the Russians and the Ukrainians to find safe passage for evacuating foreign nationals who may be trapped in the Ukrainian crisis. So I think that could be one other possible step which could be taken. But government of India has, beyond sending ministers, because ministers actually become VIPs whom the embassies have to look after in a crisis situation and guide them and draw up their programs. What they really need also at this stage is to shore up the embassies in the neighboring countries now with working level people who can man phones, who can, have emergency centers, and so on. The government is sending planes.
You've given some very interesting suggestions. Yes, you've given some very interesting suggestions. I'll come back to you again. Let me also go across to KP Fabian, who was Joint Secretary of the Gulf Division in the External Affairs Ministry in 1990 during the world's largest civilian evacuation ever out of Kuwait. I want to ask you, we've heard, the concerns that, experts have with our current evacuation plan. I want to ask you, are we on the right track? And you understand how the External Affairs Ministry functions. Did we not prepare a contingency plan for a situation like this? Or did we underestimate Putin?
But it appears that there was no contingency plan. And I want to tell you that in 1990, we had a plan to get our people, 176,000 from Iraq and Kuwait, but we also had a contingency plan to get all our people from the Gulf, and we had formulated it. But let me also tell you, one of the reasons, only one, why we did that was that we thought that should there be a parliament question, do you have contingency plans? MEA wanted to say truthfully, yes, we had contingency plans. So as my colleagues have said, that is something where we seem to have slipped up. Now, the point made by Ambassador Soni about mobilizing the Indian community is very well taken. In fact, we had mobilized the Indian community in 1990. But let me make it clear, the situation then was largely peaceful. There was no hot war at that time. So it was possible for us to do that. Now the situation is so difficult, and I had a word with some of our colleagues in the control room. Basically, we have about 3,000 of our students in Kharkiv and Sumy, and both are very close to Russia. And this is very important. 4 or 5 days ago, we had told Russia, kindly, help us to make arrangements to get our students to Russia. Now, when we made that request at that time, Russia was more in control of that area. But the next day or the day after, situation changed. Russia's control was less. So there is a real problem in arranging for safe passage for our students from these two places to Russia. But our request to Russia stands. Now, as regards the strengthening the embassies, I am told that the embassies have been strengthened. And as regards sending the ministers, I agree with Ambassador Meera Shankar. Well, it's a good PR gesture. Ambassadors can manage the situations if their time is not taken up by VVIPs.
It's a good PR gesture, you're calling it. Ambassador Shankar said that ministers actually become VVIPs for embassies, and the focus right now should be on ensuring that all the Indians who are stranded there are brought back safely. Dr. VB Soni, you understand Ukraine, as I was mentioning earlier also. Now, we just heard about how the situation, how the evacuation was by Mr. Fabian, in 1990. At that time, there were no phones as well. Today, the problem is it's in the middle of a war that we are looking at evacuation, and what what kind of challenges, need to be addressed in your opinion? You understand the terrain. It is being told to the students, to the Indians there, that reach to the western part of the country, near the western border. But if somebody who is in the capital city, where bombings are taking place, somebody who's close to the eastern part of the country, where the situation is quite difficult, how does one really reach? It's easy to say reach to the western part of the country, but how does one do that? Because Jonathan, my colleague, was telling us trains are oversubscribed. People do not know what to do.
Logistics at the best of time was a problem even then in Ukraine. It has only worsened now. There are private operators are not as well organized as elsewhere, including as we have in India. We have all kind of facilities there. Also, an unfortunate part of Ukraine is the preponderance of bureaucracy. No decision making, everything has to be referred, and things don't get done unless and until somebody's palm is greased. That is the reason when they apply for membership of the European Union, they cannot match up to the high standards which are set by European Union. They may make an application as they did today, but at the same time, situation can improve only and only if only and only if there is a situation when you remove all the controls. So that is not happening right now. You can send messages to wherever you want to, but unless it goes down the line, it will not be implemented. Ministers may say, yes, we'll get it done. But on the ground situation, totally different. It's a very difficult country at the best of time. In this time, it's even worse because this is the time to also settle scores. Let me tell you, there are reports, I do not know to what extent they are true, that at some border posts, some Indian students were told, this is what you did at the UN, you do not deserve any consideration. And in that batch of people, according to the report given by a student, there were Nepalese and Pakistanis. They were not subjected to the same kind of grilling or same kind of a situation. So this is when the ground situation is in Ukraine. It's not going to be easy, but you have still to do. You have to find a way to work around that situation. And no, it's not going to be easy. Frustrating and dangerous, and will continue until and unless messages reach them.
Okay. Mr. KP Fabian, what kind of lessons can India really learn from the evacuations that have happened in the past to ensure that Indians are, taken out of Ukraine safely? Because we have carried out many such operations in the past. Look, during the COVID pandemic too, when Indians had to be taken out from several countries, when lockdown was announced, Kuwait, we just now discussed. So what is going to be your suggestion given the current circumstances to the government? For example, what Ambassador Meera Shankar had to say, that there should be some makeshift arrangement for food and accommodation when they cross the border.
Well, the first lesson to learn is that we have to be prudent when the situation is likely to get worse. Then we have to take action. The embassy, of course, issued an advisory, but that advisory was not drafted in a compelling way. You know what I mean? So, prudence. Second is that in this case, it was not important to bring all of them to India, Operation Ganga. No, it is important to get them out of the danger zone, that is Ukraine. So if we had started some weeks ago, and if they could have been taken out, well, they would have remained in the neighboring countries or elsewhere. And if things get better, they would go back. So there again, I think there was a conceptual mistake. And I would also say that, we summoned, the Foreign Secretary summoned the ambassadors of Russia and Ukraine, was it 2 days ago? Well, I think that also should have been done days ago. And the thing to do in such circumstances is to make sure that there are concentrations of our students in a bunker or elsewhere, and tell both Russia and Ukraine, listen, these are the coordinates where our students are. So we request you, we demand that they should be safe. And of course, the mobilization of the community, which Ambassador Soni mentioned, is very, very important.
Interesting point. Ambassador Meera Shankar, I want to give you the last word. Now, of course, efforts are being made by the Indian side, and students are being asked to reach, if possible, towards the western part of the country, but it's going to be really, really tough. So now, once again, can we have these representatives within Ukraine somehow to facilitate the evacuation process? Is that still missing? Can that happen?
I think it's a bit difficult now in this situation, but clearly it's something which needs to be done. And I think both Ambassador Soni and Ambassador Fabian have given really good suggestions based on their experience of handling, such situations in the past. And I think that whatever resources we can mobilize, we must. One thing which has happened is that the neighboring governments have agreed to allow our nationals to enter without visas, whether it's Poland or Romania or Hungary. And flights which are being sent from India are going to these places because they cannot enter Ukraine, since Ukrainian airspace has been blocked by Ukraine. No external flights can enter right now. And so obviously it's not possible for our flights to go into Ukraine, but they are going to the neighboring countries. And so at least that's a positive. But again, as Ambassador Fabian said, maybe some of the students just have to be helped to cross the border into other European countries. And even if they are not evacuated immediately, they will be in safety.
All right. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening. Some very, very important suggestions you all have given to us. And we really hope that these are implemented so that the remaining Indians and Indian students who are stranded in Ukraine are brought back safely. Unfortunately, one Indian student has lost his life in Ukraine today. And the sad news that we got from Ukraine, but we want all others to come back home safely. We will slip into a very, very short break at this point in time. On the other side, we'll tell you what's happening on the diplomatic level between Russia and Ukraine. Stay with us.